The Young Bucks reportedly send out feelers about possible WWE interest in signing the AEW EVPs once their AEW contracts expire. CM Punk undergoes surgery for his torn triceps. Chris Jericho confirms that multiple AEW stars have been offered different kinds of contracts. Sammy Guevara advances in the AEW World Championship tournament, and Samoa Joe will return to in-ring action next week. Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well. As always, there are plenty of news stories to get into in the world of All Elite Wrestling. We've got to start off talking about the Young Bucks. Now, obviously, we've spoken extensively this week about the Young Bucks, their suspension from AEW, the backstage confrontation between them, Kenny Omega, CM Punk, and Ace Steel last weekend at AEW All Out after that infamous CM Punk media scrub. Now, obviously, details are still very murky and very confusing about who was the instigator, who threw the first punch in that confrontation. On CM Punk and Ace Steel's side of things, you have that Matt Jackson threw the first punch. On the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega side of things, you have that CM Punk threw the first punch. We're going to be talking news about Punk in this video, but let's start off talking about the Young Bucks possibly leaving AEW in the future. Now, it must be said, this will not happen for a really long time, such a long period of time that anything can happen in pro wrestling. So, let's backtrack a little bit here. Now, of course, Cody Rhodes joined WWE earlier this year after leaving AEW, and could he be joined by the Young Bucks in WWE? If that does happen, it won't happen for a couple of years at the very least. According to the Wrestling Observer's Ryan Frederick, he stated on an F4W board that the Young Bucks have sent feelers out through a WWE talent about interest in signing the AEW tag team once their deals expire. Now, it should be noted that this is something that a lot of wrestlers do, and there at the moment are no indications that Matt or Nick Jackson, or both of them, want to leave All Elite Wrestling in the immediate future, or even when their AEW contracts expire. Now, Frederick said this in response to someone on the board who falsely claimed that Matt and Nick Jackson signed new deals. He said, quote, "They didn't sign new deals, their options were picked up. They did reach out to talent to send feelers that they would be interested in talking about coming in once their deals are up. But everyone on both sides are going to do the same because you want to look for the best deal. Anyone who doesn't do so is dumb and possibly leaving money on the table." Now, later in this same thread, Frederick said, quote, "They reached out to a talent to send feelers about coming in. I can't say they talked to anyone direct at WWE, but that would fall under tampering, and this came at a time the legal letters were being sent about tampering. Can't confirm they actually talked to WWE people themselves, but they talked to other WWE talent about coming in, which they can do, much like WWE talent can send feelers through AEW talent, which of course has happened and happens on both sides often. Now, this isn't something that wouldn't have been done anyway, since their deals are coming up at the end of 2024. The Young Bucks contracts come up at the end of 2024. They're in the company for at least the next over 2 years. And of course, you want to maximize your leverage when it comes to getting a new deal and get the companies into a bidding war. We've heard Maxwell Jacob Friedman talk about the same thing, the grand bidding war of 2024 when his AEW contract does expire. It's not necessarily a sign that the Young Bucks are going to leave. Everybody should do it. It's smart business. The hard thing, though, with the wrestler contracts, and another reason they really aren't independent contractors, is they can't even negotiate deals until their old deals have expired. It's not like they can have one deal end on December 31st and show up in their new job on January 1st unless they strike a deal in the first new hours on the 1st. But generally, the only way that happens is if there's been indirect talks beforehand, much like in this situation. Wrestler contracts really should be more like NASCAR contracts. There is a situation there a couple of months ago where a driver, Tyler Reddick, signed with a new team for 2024 and beyond, despite his contract with his current team ending in 2023. However, because he's an independent contractor, like a NASCAR drivers are classified, he's free to negotiate and start another job when his current job ends at any point. That again was mentioned by Ryan Frederick, that example, hat tip to him. Now, of course, the Young Bucks are friends with several people within WWE, so it shouldn't be hard for Matt and Nick Jackson to get in touch with management when it is legally allowed. With this one, obviously, the headline that gets people talking is, the Young Bucks, they're talking to people within WWE, or they're reaching out. And the best way to describe this is, most importantly, they have reached out to WWE talent to say, when our contracts are up, would there be interest about bringing us in? As I mentioned, talent do that. All talent do that. Randy Orton did that when his contract with WWE was expiring. What would the deal look like in AEW? Kevin Owens did the same thing. What would the deal look like in AEW? And then they sign a new deal with WWE, and they said, I was never going to leave. I was never interested in leaving. But they sent out those feelers. Even if they, in their mind's eye, had no interest in signing with the opposition, they do it just to let WWE know there's another offer on the table. There are other people that are interested in me, and they get the best deal. It's always good, as the report mentions, to get yourself in a bit more. And frankly, to talk about the Young Bucks possibly going to WWE, it's not happening anytime soon. I know at the moment they're suspended because of what happened with CM Punk last weekend. Ultimately, though, the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega, they're not going to get fired. And, I mean, maybe they'll walk, but even if they do, AEW's not going to grant those release. And even if they say, okay, you've walked, they're not going to wrestle for the next 2 and a bit years. It's going to be a little bit like Malachi Black. That precedent has been set at this point. Malachi Black eventually was granted his release by AEW, but it was a conditional release, basically meaning, we'll let you out of your contract, but you can't go and wrestle for WWE. And this happened all the time in the 80s and 90s with WWE and WCW. People asked for a release, they signed a conditional release, that was it. You're prohibited from working with X company, our competitor. And that would be the same if Omega and the Bucks walked out now. So don't expect to see the Young Bucks or Kenny Omega appearing on WWE television anytime soon. Now, come 2024, at the end of 2024, by the way, so we're talking about 2025, we're talking like 2 and a bit years away, over 2 and a bit years. Just think how much can change in 2 and a bit years. Think how much has changed in the last 2.5 years in the world of pro wrestling. Think. What we're in September 2022 right now. So if you say 2.5 years, think back to March of 2020. The pandemic had just hit. That feels like a lifetime ago at this point. So much has happened in the world, let alone in pro wrestling since then. So who knows? Who knows what is going to be going on during that period of time? Just think how much has changed in wrestling. Forget the world. Think how much has changed in wrestling since then. Vince McMahon's not in charge of WWE anymore. You know, Cody Rhodes isn't in AEW anymore. He's in WWE. CM Punk's back wrestling. Bryan Danielson's in AEW. Triple H is in charge of creative in WWE. I mean, just think. Just think how much has changed in WWE and AEW during that period of time. Practically the entire companies have changed. So, yes, the Young Bucks could be interested. And yes, they're trying to gauge interest as to what's there when their contracts are up in AEW. But by that point, CM Punk might be long gone. And all these issues might be long gone in AEW. Who even knows if AEW is going to be around at that point? They most likely will. There's a lot of money in that bank of the Khan family. But my point being is so much can and will change between now and then that it's really difficult to say. And frankly, this is what every pro wrestler does. I think the reason why this is being spoken about now is purely because of what happened last weekend with the Bucks, Omega, and CM Punk. And this idea that if the Bucks and Omega left AEW, they'd go to WWE tomorrow. It really wouldn't be that simple. AEW would do everything within their power to prevent that from happening. Even if they did let them go, even if they did quit, they would make sure they can't work for WWE. Because it's smart business. Why would you have 3 EVPs of the company, 3 of your top stars just walk into the opposition? That makes no sense. Frankly, it didn't make a ton of sense with Cody Rhodes because they had an option year on Cody Rhodes' contract, and Tony Khan and Cody Rhodes came to an agreement that they weren't going to extend it, or he wasn't going to pick up that option. Out of respect for Cody Rhodes, he said he wasn't going to pick up that option. They wouldn't do that with the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega. Can you imagine the 4 EVPs all being under contract to WWE? That would be wild. It'd be so damaging to a brand that's been really damaged recently. So that wouldn't happen. Now, in 2.5 years' time, could that happen? Sure. I mean, Triple H, I'm assuming he'll still be in charge of creative and talent relations at that period of time. And frankly, previously, maybe the Young Bucks wouldn't have had an opportunity in WWE. Maybe Vince McMahon wouldn't have, and even the Young Bucks actually, they'd have thought, why would we go to WWE? Tag team wrestling means nothing in that company. Under Vince McMahon hates tag team wrestling. The tag team division is just pure nonsense at that point. Why would we go there? Now, is that going to change in Triple H? It's going to take a lot of time to repair, and maybe in a couple of years' time, maybe the tag team division will be really, really strong again. Maybe tag teams will be main eventing pay-per-views and what have you, and the tag team division and the tag team championships mean something. And by then, the Young Bucks, Triple H should give him a chance. Of course he would. He's very progressive in that essence, so that could happen. But they might be very, very comfortable in AEW once again by that point because so much will have changed. So I don't see it as a major story in all actuality. Every pro wrestler does it. Every pro wrestler sends feelers out to the other company to see what's available because they are independent contractors, and it's wise to do that. It's very wise to see, if I were to go tomorrow, or if I were to consider coming into this company, what offer would be on the table? What would my schedule look like? Is there interest? And even if there's just interest, you can then start to negotiate both sides against each other. That's how you get a good deal. Pro wrestling career isn't very long. You have to make your money somehow, even if you're an EVP, even if you helped found the company. And that would be the case when it comes to the Young Bucks. So it's a story that, to be honest, again, I think is somewhat actually of a non-story in all honesty. Now let's talk about CM Punk. Of course, we know that CM Punk is injured, and we have an update on Punk actually now officially undergoing surgery. CM Punk reportedly underwent surgery earlier this week to repair a torn left triceps that he suffered at last Sunday's All Out pay-per-view. According to Dave Meltzer of the Wrestling Observer newsletter, Punk's doctor recommended the surgery happen quickly as to, quote, prevent any muscle atrophy and cause further complications in the wrestler's road to recovery. As we've spoken about previously here on the channel, the recovery timeline for the surgery is typically 8 months. There had been diagnosis out there that it would be between 6 to 8 months that Punk would be out. As we mentioned before, Punk suffered the injury while performing a tope early in his main event match against Jon Moxley at All Out. Earlier on Dynamite this week, of course, AEW President Tony Khan announced a tournament to crown a new AEW World Champion, with the final set to take place at the second annual Dynamite Grand Slam episode on September 21st. According to several reports, Punk would have been forced to vacate his title regardless of his suspension. So those people that are saying that, oh, it was just because of his suspension, no, Punk would have had to vacate anyway because you can't have an interim champion for 8 months. Punk's foot injury before was a bit like, well, he's going to be out for a month, a couple of months, we can do an interim champion. When you're out for 8 months, it's nearly a year, you need to have a full-time world champion. So that would have been the case. Irrespective of his suspension or employment status, they needed to vacate the championship. And of course, the suspension that he's currently serving in AEW is imposed on him following his expletive-laced tirade at the post-All-Out media scrum and the ensuing backstage melee involving the Young Bucks, Kenny Omega, and several others. And you have to think, when it comes to Punk, how old is he now? 43, I believe he is. He's in his 40s. And within a span of 6 months, Punk has suffered 2 serious injuries, leading to both his reigns as AEW World Champion ending without any title defenses and ending within a matter of days. While Punk wasn't stripped of the title in May, he quickly lost a title unification match upon his return to the interim champion Jon Moxley before winning it back at All Out last Sunday. Now, although AEW has yet to make an official announcement on Punk's future, Meltzer reported this week that a lot of people within the company want to see Punk gone from the promotion, specifically due to his scathing comments directed at Hangman Adam Page at the post-All-Out press conference. So there you go. We now have the official injury update on CM Punk. We've spoken about it. There's been a lot of speculation this week about it. There's been discussion that he had a torn bicep, tricep, a torn pec. There was discussion that he might have been out for 6 to 8 months. We now know he had surgery on his torn left triceps. He's going to be out of action for 8 months. And as I mentioned, he's already had the surgery, which most likely would have been in that discussion that he had with Tony Khan probably earlier this week. We know he had that meeting with the AEW president on Tuesday discussing his possible exit from the company or his exit from television. Those details were kept very vague. Most likely, and this is me speculating, most likely it was probably a case of you're suspended, and Punk kept saying, well, also I'm hurt. Like, I have to undergo surgery this week. I'm going to be out of action for 8 months. And as I mentioned, probably for Punk, you know what, and AEW and Tony Khan, it's the best thing. If CM Punk was healthy coming out of All Out, AEW would have a real decision on their hands. What do they do? What do they do? They suspended Punk. Did they strip him of the title like they did with the Bucks and Omega when it comes to the Trios World Championships? What do they do? Now, with him being gone for 8 months anyway, it makes that conversation a lot easier. Well, we've got to vacate the title anyway. You're going to be away from TV. Maybe by the time you come back, things might have cooled off a little bit. In the time away from the company, we can figure out what happened. We can maybe smooth things over with the Bucks and the Elite, and Omega rather. So, if anything, this injury, whilst it is problematic for AEW, given the grand scheme of the situation, it's probably the best thing that could happen to Punk and AEW, because it gives separation and it gives time for AEW to make that decision. And as I mentioned before, any kind of leverage Punk had has just vanished. I mean, it really has just vanished, because you could say, he said those things in that press conference because he felt very comfortable with his position, his spot. I'm the world champion. I've drawn money from the company. What are they going to do? Fire me? Well, when you get into a physical altercation, and also once you're injured for 8 months, they might fire you because you can't make them any money anymore. Yes, you can talk about licensing and merchandising, but you can't wrestle and you can't appear on the program. You've got to rehab. And it makes AEW's position certainly more powerful, and CM Punk's position less powerful, certainly. Chris Jericho had Alan Angels on his podcast, Talk is Jericho, this week. Former AEW wrestler and Dark Order member Alan Angels, that is. And Jericho confirmed that quite a few members of the AEW roster were offered pay-per-appearance deals in the aftermath of their original contracts expiring. Our Angels spoke on Talk is Jericho's the podcast about his release and shared how thankful he was to get a chance from Tony Khan and AEW to wrestle during the first stages of the pandemic. Quote, "You're not the only one that got offered a per appearance deal after their contract was done," Jericho responded. "Happened to quite a few guys because, once again, now that the first couple of years of AEW is over, CM Punk is here now, Adam Cole is here, Bryan Danielson is here. It's not a cut down on you, it's just the whole financial contract scene went in AEW." Basically, Jericho saying that, well, obviously, the budget got eaten up by some of these big signings in AEW, like CM Punk, like Bryan Danielson, like Adam Cole. And those people, when their contracts were expiring, suddenly the budget wasn't really there. And also, they have to think, well, we're going to sign other people in the future, and suddenly the contracts that were there previously weren't as financially viable. And I know people will look at CM Punk or Bryan Danielson and Adam Cole and say, oh, look, ex-WWE guys, and AEW wasn't looking after the guys initially there, but if Adam Cole and Bryan Danielson and CM Punk become available, you sign them. And if you say, what, to compensate for that, we have to turn some of these other people onto per appearance deals, you do it. Like that, you do it. That's business. That's pro wrestling. People might not like it, but that's cutthroat business. That's pro wrestling at the end of the day. Now, let's talk a little bit about Rampage. Of course, Rampage was last night on TNT, and during the episode of Rampage, we had a AEW World Championship tournament match, Tournament of Champions, as it's called, and Sammy Guevara is moving on to the semi-finals of the Tournament of Champions to determine a new AEW World Champion. He defeated Darby Allin in a quarter-final match with some help of his fellow Jericho Appreciation Society members. In the closing moments, we had Anna Jay run down to the ring, distract the referee, which allowed Guevara's wife, Tay Mello, to throw a skateboard into the ring. Guevara took advantage and hit Allin with a low blow, which led him to getting the victory. This will now lead to Guevara facing Jon Moxley on this upcoming Wednesday's Dynamite in Albany, New York. On the other side of the bracket, Guevara's mentor, Chris Jericho, will be taking on the Blackpool Combat Club's Bryan Danielson in a rematch from All Out. So Guevara's going to face Moxley, and I would assume he's going to lose. Moxley's going to win, and he's going to go into the final, and then I suppose it depends what we're going to see. Are we going to see Moxley versus Danielson in the final? We're going to see Moxley versus Jericho in the final. I would hope to see Moxley versus Danielson. I think that's fun. And ultimately, I want Bryan Danielson to win. But now that I think about it, the way they had Moxley confront MJF, it kind of makes sense that Moxley would win it and then drop the bout to MJF. But then Moxley's had World Championship reigns, interim championship reigns. He's been all over that championship scene. And I kind of like the idea of Bryan Danielson holding the championship for a couple of months or something like that, or a month or so until Full Gear, where he drops it to MJF, right? I think we also could see a situation where it doesn't matter who wins that tournament because MJF comes out right after and wins the World Championship. I think that's a possibility too. Speaking of Rampage as well, we got an appearance by Samoa Joe, who confirmed that next week he will defend his Ring of Honor World Television Championship. He said thanks for being back and all this kind of stuff back in AEW. He was interrupted by Mark Sterling, Josh Woods, and Tony Nese. Sterling made the case for Woods to receive a title shot. Joe was eager to defend his championship and offered Woods a title match right there and then on the spot. However, Sterling was in less of a hurry and stepped in to prevent things from going any further. He insisted the paperwork wasn't completed and also took a cheap shot at the crowd of Buffalo, New York, by adding he would rather see that match happen next week in the better New York town of Albany. It was later announced that the title match will happen on the September 16 episode of Rampage. So Samoa Joe will be defending his television championship next week, which he will retain. I mean, there's just so many championships in AEW right now. That Ring of Honor television deal can't come soon enough. And there needs to be some separation between Ring of Honor and AEW, in my opinion. But there you go, guys. That's the latest AEW news. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Be sure to smash a like on the like button. Be sure to subscribe, bottom right-hand corner. And I'll speak with you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.